Christmas Eve in Los Angeles should have been a peaceful night, but for New York City police officer John McClane, it begins with uncertainty. After spending months apart from his wife, Holly, because of her successful career in California, John boards a flight hoping to repair his fractured marriage. The distance between them has created emotional walls that seem just as difficult to overcome as any physical obstacle. As the plane lands, John carries only a small bag and a quiet determination to give his family another chance. He has no idea that before the night is over, he will face the greatest challenge of his life. The city lights sparkle beneath the evening sky, giving the illusion of peace, but danger is already moving toward its target. John's arrival feels ordinary, almost routine, yet every small moment is quietly setting the stage for a night that will become unforgettable. His focus is simple: reunite with Holly, see his children, and enjoy Christmas together. Fate, however, has prepared an entirely different plan. What begins as a family visit will soon transform into a desperate fight for survival, proving that courage often appears in the most unexpected circumstances. After landing, John is greeted by Argyle, a cheerful limousine driver who has been sent by Holly's company. Unlike John, Argyle is energetic and talkative, trying to make the long drive entertaining with music and friendly conversation. As they travel through Los Angeles, John shares pieces of his personal life, revealing that his marriage has been strained ever since Holly accepted a major promotion and moved across the country. John remained in New York because of his police career, believing that one day Holly would return. Instead, time has only widened the gap between them. Argyle listens carefully and encourages John to stay optimistic, reminding him that Christmas is the perfect opportunity for families to reconnect. The conversation provides a calm and humorous contrast to the tension hidden beneath John's quiet expression. Although he tries to remain hopeful, there is uncertainty in his eyes. He knows that repairing a broken relationship will require honesty, patience, and understanding. Neither man realizes that while they are discussing family and second chances, a carefully organized criminal operation is already approaching the same destination. The limousine finally arrives at the impressive Nakatomi Plaza, one of the tallest and most luxurious office buildings in Los Angeles. The skyscraper shines brightly against the night sky, symbolizing wealth, ambition, and corporate success. Inside, the Nakatomi Corporation is hosting an elegant Christmas party for its employees. Executives, secretaries, managers, and guests laugh together while music fills the building. Expensive decorations, sparkling lights, and festive drinks create an atmosphere of celebration. Employees are enjoying the final hours before Christmas, believing they are completely safe inside one of the city's most secure buildings. Security guards monitor the entrances, elevators operate normally, and no one expects any danger. John enters the building wearing simple clothes, making him appear completely different from the wealthy executives attending the party. His modest appearance highlights the contrast between his working-class life as a police officer and Holly's new corporate environment. Even before meeting his wife, John feels like an outsider surrounded by expensive suits and successful business professionals. The building itself almost becomes another character in the story, standing tall and silent while unknowingly preparing to become the battlefield for an extraordinary confrontation. John eventually reaches the office floor where the Christmas celebration is taking place. Holly is surprised to see him, and although she welcomes him politely, Their reunion is far from perfect. Years of separation cannot disappear within a few moments. Their conversation begins with awkward smiles but gradually reveals unresolved disagreements. Holly has become confident and independent in Los Angeles, while John still believes the family should live together in New York. Both love their children deeply, yet neither has found a way to balance career ambitions with family life. Their discussion becomes emotional as old frustrations return to the surface. Despite the tension, there is still affection between them, suggesting that their relationship has not completely fallen apart. Before the conversation can continue, Holly introduces John to several co-workers, including the ambitious executive Harry Ellis. Ellis immediately notices the uncomfortable atmosphere and attempts to ease the situation with jokes and casual conversation. John appreciates the effort but remains focused on repairing his marriage. What none of them realize is that these ordinary social interactions will soon be interrupted by unimaginable violence. Seeking a moment alone, John is shown to Holly's private office where he can freshen up after his long flight. Following a suggestion from a fellow passenger on the airplane, John removes his shoes and socks, allowing his feet to relax after hours of travel. This seemingly insignificant decision becomes one of the most important moments of the entire story. Barefoot and vulnerable, John has no reason to suspect that danger is only minutes away. He changes clothes, washes his face, and attempts to calm himself before returning to the party. Outside the office, laughter and music continue throughout the building. Employees exchange gifts, celebrate promotions, and enjoy the festive atmosphere without any concern. The peaceful environment creates a powerful contrast with what is about to happen. Every detail, from John's missing shoes to the quiet hallways, is carefully positioning him for the impossible challenge ahead. Sometimes the smallest choices have the greatest consequences, and John's decision to remove his shoes will affect every step he takes during the longest night of his life. Far below, a large truck quietly arrives outside Nakatomi Plaza. Several men dressed in dark clothing exit the vehicle with calm precision. They move with military discipline, speaking very little while carrying equipment hidden inside containers. Their leader is Hans Gruber, an intelligent, sophisticated criminal whose calm voice hides ruthless determination. Unlike ordinary criminals, Hans believes in planning every detail before taking action. He has studied the building, the security systems, and the people inside. Every member of his team understands their specific responsibilities, leaving almost no room for mistakes. Without attracting attention, they enter the building and immediately begin taking control. The security desk is neutralized within seconds, communication lines are cut, and access points are secured with remarkable efficiency. Their operation unfolds so smoothly that most people inside the building remain completely unaware that anything unusual is happening. While Christmas music continues upstairs, the terrorists are silently transforming the skyscraper into a prison from which escape will soon become almost impossible. Within moments, the celebration is shattered by the sudden arrival of armed men carrying automatic weapons. The music stops instantly as confusion spreads across the room. Employees freeze in shock while the criminals force everyone to gather together under armed guard. Panic replaces celebration as people realize they have become hostages. Hans Gruber remains calm throughout the operation, introducing himself with confidence and making it clear that any resistance will have severe consequences. His voice is controlled and polite, making him even more intimidating. Unlike criminals driven by emotion, Hans operates with intelligence and patience, carefully managing every aspect of the situation. The hostages are ordered to remain silent while his team secures every floor of the building. Their movements reveal extensive preparation, suggesting that this operation has been planned for months. Fear spreads rapidly among the employees, but they have no idea that one person has escaped immediate capture. Hidden elsewhere in the building, John McClane has unknowingly become the only obstacle standing between the terrorists and complete control of Nakatomi. Meanwhile, Hans Gruber calmly takes control of the hostage floor without raising his voice. His confidence immediately establishes authority over both his men and the terrified employees. Unlike many criminals who rely on fear alone, Hans combines intelligence with psychological control. He reassures the hostages that if they remain cooperative, they will not be harmed, but everyone can sense that his polite manner hides absolute ruthlessness. His team begins collecting identification cards, checking employee names, and separating important executives from the rest of the crowd. Among those present is Joseph Takagi, the president of Nakatomi Corporation's American division. Hans shows a particular interest in Takagi because he believes the executive holds the key to the building's secure vault. Although the situation appears calm on the surface, every conversation is carefully designed to move Hans one step closer to his real objective. The hostages remain confused because the criminals have made no demands and have not contacted the authorities. Most assume they are witnessing an ordinary hostage crisis, but Hans has no interest in negotiations. His true goal remains hidden, known only to his carefully selected team. Back upstairs, John continues moving through the unfinished construction levels, searching for a way to contact the outside world. He discovers that the building's telephone lines have already been disconnected, leaving almost every office completely isolated. Realizing that traditional communication is impossible, he begins searching for another solution. Eventually, he finds an emergency radio used by the building's security personnel. With great caution, John attempts to contact emergency services, but interference and damaged systems make communication difficult. Finally, a weak signal reaches the Los Angeles Police Department. John urgently explains that heavily armed terrorists have taken over Nakatomi Plaza and that dozens of innocent people are being held hostage. Unfortunately, because the transmission is unclear and sounds incomplete, the dispatcher assumes it may simply be a false alarm or a holiday prank. This misunderstanding frustrates John, who knows every passing minute strengthens the terrorists' control. He continues trying to convince someone to take the warning seriously while remaining hidden from nearby patrols. The tension continues to build because John realizes that if help does not arrive soon, he may be forced to confront the terrorists entirely on his own. Hans, meanwhile, escorts Joseph Takagi into a private office for questioning. Their conversation begins politely, with Hans displaying remarkable knowledge about the corporation and its international business operations. Rather than making emotional threats, Hans calmly asks Takagi for the access codes required to unlock the company's enormous vault. Takagi immediately understands that the terrorists are not motivated by politics, despite the public image they are trying to create. He refuses to cooperate, insisting that he does not possess the final codes necessary to access the vault. Hans remains patient at first, giving Takagi several opportunities to reconsider. However, when it becomes clear that the executive will not reveal any useful information, Hans demonstrates the true nature of his leadership. Without hesitation, he kills Takagi in front of everyone nearby, proving that he is willing to eliminate anyone who stands in his way. The shocking act silences the remaining hostages, replacing hope with overwhelming fear. It also reveals that Hans is completely committed to completing his mission regardless of the human cost. Hidden several floors above, John hears the gunshot echo through the building. The sound confirms his worst fears. Until this moment, there was still a possibility that negotiations might peacefully resolve the crisis. Now John understands that innocent lives are already being lost and that waiting passively is no longer an option. Carefully observing one of the terrorists moving alone through the upper levels, John decides to take his first direct action. He quietly follows the gunman, using the shadows and unfinished hallways to remain unseen. Every movement requires complete concentration because one mistake would expose his position to the entire terrorist team. As the gunman enters an isolated construction area, John suddenly attacks with all the speed and strength developed through years of police training. The struggle is brutal, silent, and desperate. Without shoes, protective equipment, or firearms, John relies entirely on surprise and determination. After an exhausting fight, he finally overpowers the terrorist, leaving him unconscious before securing his weapon and equipment. For the first time since the takeover began, John gains access to a machine gun, ammunition, and a portable radio. Although he now possesses better weapons, he also realizes that the missing terrorist will soon alert the others that someone inside the building is fighting back. John quickly searches the fallen terrorist and identifies him as Tony. Understanding the psychological importance of his next move, John writes a bold message on the terrorist's clothing before sending the body down the elevator toward the hostage floor. The message reads, "Now I have a machine gun, ho ho ho." It is more than a joke. It is John's way of informing Hans that there is an unexpected opponent inside the building, someone capable of disrupting even the most carefully planned operation. When the elevator doors open, Hans and his men immediately understand that one of their own has been eliminated. The atmosphere changes instantly. Until now, the terrorists believed they had complete control over every floor of the building. Suddenly, they realize an unknown survivor is moving freely through the tower. Hans does not panic. Instead, his curiosity grows. Rather than becoming angry, he begins analyzing the situation like a chess player studying an unexpected move. He knows that defeating this mysterious opponent will require intelligence rather than blind aggression. Furious but disciplined, Hans orders several members of his team to search the upper construction floors. The terrorists spread through the unfinished levels carrying automatic weapons, expecting to eliminate the intruder within minutes. John uses his knowledge of the building's layout to stay one step ahead, hiding behind steel beams, ventilation ducts, and unfinished walls. The massive construction site becomes a deadly maze where every shadow may conceal either hunter or prey. One by one, John creates distractions to separate the terrorists from each other, refusing to engage large groups directly. He understands that survival depends on fighting only when absolutely necessary. Each successful escape increases the terrorists' frustration while strengthening John's confidence. At the same time, Hans begins respecting the unknown opponent. Whoever this man is, he clearly possesses law enforcement or military experience. The carefully planned operation is no longer proceeding according to schedule, and Hans realizes that a single determined individual may become a greater threat than an entire police force if left unchecked. Outside the skyscraper, Argyle continues waiting patiently inside the limousine, completely unaware of the nightmare unfolding above him. Listening to loud music and enjoying snacks, he assumes John is simply reconnecting with his wife at the Christmas party. The peaceful scene outside contrasts sharply with the violence inside the building. The city continues celebrating Christmas Eve while only a handful of people know that dozens of innocent hostages are trapped inside one of Los Angeles' tallest skyscrapers. Far above, John tightens his grip on the captured machine gun and quietly prepares for the next confrontation. He has successfully survived the opening moments of the crisis, but he also understands that the terrorists now know someone is fighting back. Every future encounter will become even more dangerous as Hans Gruber begins hunting the mysterious man who refuses to surrender. The battle inside Nakatomi Plaza has officially begun, and both sides now recognize that only one of them will ultimately emerge victorious. John McClane knows that his first victory has completely changed the situation inside Nakatomi Plaza. Before eliminating Tony, he was simply another hidden survivor trying to stay alive. Now he has become the terrorists' greatest concern. Every member of Hans Gruber's team begins searching the upper floors with greater caution, moving in pairs and checking every unfinished office, storage room, and construction area. John understands that surprise is becoming harder to use because the enemy now expects resistance. Even so, he refuses to panic. Instead, he studies the building's layout, remembering every staircase, elevator shaft, maintenance tunnel, and ventilation duct he has passed. His years as a New York police officer taught him that patience often defeats strength. Every second he remains alive gives the authorities another opportunity to discover what is happening inside the skyscraper. The terrorists may have superior weapons, but John has something they do not possess. He knows how ordinary people think under pressure, and he understands that criminals eventually make mistakes when their perfect plans begin to fall apart. That belief becomes the foundation of his determination as he quietly prepares for another dangerous encounter. Hans Gruber remains remarkably calm despite losing one of his men. Instead of allowing anger to control his decisions, he gathers his team and carefully reviews the situation. He explains that the mysterious intruder is probably acting alone, but his training makes him extremely dangerous. Hans orders everyone to stay alert while continuing the operation according to schedule. He refuses to let one unexpected problem destroy months of planning. Secretly, however, Hans begins developing respect for his invisible opponent. Whoever this man is, he has already proven himself intelligent, resourceful, and fearless. Most people trapped in a hostage situation would focus only on surviving until rescue arrived. This unknown individual is actively hunting heavily armed terrorists inside their own controlled environment. Hans recognizes that such courage cannot be ignored. Rather than underestimating his enemy, he begins thinking several moves ahead, treating the conflict like a complex chess match where every decision could determine victory or defeat. The battle is becoming personal even though neither man has yet met face to face. Meanwhile, John successfully restores contact with the outside world through the stolen radio. This time his message reaches Sergeant Al Powell of the Los Angeles Police Department, Powell initially believes the strange transmission might be another false alarm because prank calls are common during holiday celebrations. John's urgent tone, however, sounds different. He describes automatic weapons, hostages, and multiple armed suspects occupying the entire building. Powell decides to investigate personally instead of dismissing the report completely. Driving toward Nakatomi Plaza, he still expects to find nothing more than an intoxicated office worker exaggerating a minor disturbance. As his patrol car approaches the brightly illuminated skyscraper, everything appears perfectly normal from the outside. The terrorists have carefully avoided attracting attention, making the building seem peaceful despite the violence hidden inside. Powell slowly circles the property, seeing no obvious signs of trouble. Inside the building, John anxiously watches from an upper window, realizing that this police officer may be his only chance to alert the authorities before it is too late. John desperately tries to attract Powell's attention without exposing himself to the terrorists. Looking around the unfinished construction floor, he spots one of the dead terrorists and quickly develops a risky plan. Knowing that simply shouting would reveal his location, John drags the body toward a broken window overlooking the parking area below. With tremendous effort, he pushes the corpse through the shattered glass. The body crashes onto the police car, startling Sergeant Powell and instantly proving that John's warning was genuine. At the same moment, automatic gunfire erupts from the upper floors as terrorists attempt to eliminate the responding officer before he can call for backup. Powell immediately drives away from the building while radioing for emergency assistance. Within minutes, police vehicles begin rushing toward Nakatomi Plaza from every direction. John's dangerous gamble has succeeded. The outside world finally knows that the hostage crisis is real. Although help is now coming, John also realizes that the terrorists will become even more aggressive after discovering that the authorities have surrounded the building. Inside, Hans Gruber quickly adapts to the changing circumstances. He expected police eventually, but not this soon. Rather than appearing worried, he calmly orders his men into defensive positions while continuing preparations to access the secure vault. Hans explains that law enforcement's arrival is actually part of the larger plan. He predicts exactly how the authorities will respond, believing every action taken by the police can ultimately work to his advantage. His confidence surprises even some members of his own team. They trust Hans because his careful planning has anticipated nearly every possible complication. While officers establish a security perimeter outside, Hans continues controlling the hostages with absolute authority. Fear keeps everyone obedient, and no one dares attempt escape after witnessing Takagi's execution. The hostages begin losing hope, believing rescue may never come. Holly, however, quietly observes everything around her. Although terrified, she refuses to surrender emotionally, showing the same inner strength that once attracted John years earlier. The Los Angeles Police Department quickly establishes command outside the building. Patrol officers block nearby streets while emergency vehicles arrive from multiple directions. Lieutenant Dwayne Robinson assumes overall control of the operation and immediately begins organizing a response. Unfortunately, Robinson dismisses John's importance almost immediately, believing the mysterious caller inside may actually be creating additional problems for trained negotiators. This misunderstanding frustrates Sergeant Powell, who has spoken directly with John over the radio and already recognizes his courage. Powell believes the unknown man is risking his own life to save innocent hostages rather than interfering with police efforts. Despite their disagreement, Robinson orders officers to secure the area while attempting to establish communication with the terrorists. News helicopters soon begin circling overhead as television stations report the developing hostage crisis across Los Angeles. What began as a hidden operation inside one office building is rapidly becoming national news. Yet none of the people watching television can imagine the deadly struggle already taking place floor by floor inside the towering skyscraper. Back inside, John quietly observes the terrorists repositioning themselves after the arrival of police outside. Using stolen radios, he listens carefully to their conversations, gathering valuable intelligence about Hans's plans. Every intercepted message helps John understand that these criminals are not motivated by political ideology, despite the statements they will soon make publicly. Their conversations repeatedly focus on schedules, explosives, security systems, and something hidden inside the building's enormous vault. John begins suspecting that the hostage situation is merely a distraction for an even larger criminal objective. This realization changes his strategy completely. If Hans succeeds in reaching the vault, the consequences could extend far beyond the lives of the hostages. John now understands that preventing the robbery itself is just as important as rescuing innocent people. With limited ammunition and no realistic chance of confronting the entire group directly, he decides to continue disrupting the terrorists' operation whenever possible, forcing them to waste valuable time searching for him instead of completing their mission. As darkness deepens outside and flashing police lights surround Nakatomi Plaza, both sides prepare for the next stage of the conflict. John tightens the straps of the stolen weapon and quietly disappears into another unfinished hallway, determined to stay one step ahead of Hans Gruber's men. Below him, frightened hostages pray for rescue while armed terrorists strengthen their defenses. Outside, dozens of police officers believe they are preparing for a standard hostage negotiation, unaware that they are facing one of the most carefully planned criminal operations ever attempted. Hans smiles confidently as he watches the authorities gather beyond the building's glass walls, convinced that every move they make is unfolding exactly as he predicted. Yet somewhere above, hidden among steel beams and unfinished concrete, one barefoot police officer continues refusing to surrender. Neither man realizes that their next encounter will bring them closer than ever before, setting the stage for a confrontation that will test intelligence, courage, and determination like never before. With police now surrounding Nakatomi Plaza, Hans Gruber decides it is time to begin negotiations on his own terms. He contacts the authorities and pretends to be a political terrorist, demanding the release of several imprisoned extremists from around the world. His speech sounds convincing, but it is only a distraction. Hans has no interest in politics. His real objective remains the massive vault hidden deep inside the building, which contains hundreds of millions of dollars in bearer bonds. While the police focus on his fake demands, his team continues working to break through the vault's advanced security system. John McClane listens to every radio conversation while moving carefully through the building. He now understands that Hans is using the hostages to buy time. John also realizes that if the terrorists reach the vault, they will probably eliminate every witness before escaping. This thought pushes him to take greater risks. Instead of hiding, he decides to interfere with the terrorists whenever possible. Using the building's unfinished hallways, he quietly follows two gunmen who have been sent to search for him. A sudden firefight breaks out when the terrorists discover John's location. Bullets tear through walls, windows, and construction equipment as John barely escapes by diving behind concrete pillars. Although heavily outnumbered, he manages to separate one terrorist from the others. Using quick thinking and his police training, John defeats the gunmen and captures more ammunition. The remaining terrorists are shocked that a single barefoot officer continues defeating their men one by one. Their confidence slowly begins to disappear. Outside the building, the FBI is called to assist with the hostage crisis. Federal agents arrive believing they can quickly end the situation, but Hans had already expected their involvement. In fact, every step taken by the authorities is helping his plan move forward. As the night grows darker, both sides prepare for an even bigger confrontation, while John silently promises himself that he will stop Hans before innocent lives are lost. The arrival of the FBI completely changes the atmosphere outside Nakatomi Plaza. Federal agents take control of the operation and begin planning a tactical response. Confident in their experience, they believe a direct assault will pressure the terrorists into surrendering. Hans Gruber watches every movement from inside the building with complete confidence. He has predicted almost every step the authorities will take, and instead of worrying, he quietly tells his men to remain patient. According to his plan, the FBI will unknowingly help disable the building's final security systems, bringing him one step closer to opening the vault. Meanwhile, John McClane continues moving through the upper floors with extreme caution. He knows the terrorists are becoming more desperate to find him, but he refuses to stop fighting. Using the radios he captured earlier, John listens to Hans's conversations and gathers valuable information. He realizes the criminals are not interested in ransom or political demands. Everything points toward a carefully planned robbery. Determined to slow them down, John damages parts of the building and creates distractions that force the terrorists to abandon their work and chase him once again. Hans eventually decides to investigate the upper floors himself. While searching alone, he unexpectedly comes face to face with John. Pretending to be one of the frightened hostages who escaped, Hans speaks calmly and convinces John that he is an innocent executive hiding from the terrorists. Believing the story, John even gives him a handgun for protection. During their conversation, both men carefully study each other. John senses something unusual, but cannot immediately identify it, while Hans quietly confirms that the mysterious man causing so many problems is actually John McClane. The moment ends when other terrorists arrive, forcing John to realize he has been tricked. A fierce gunfight erupts across the unfinished floor as bullets smash windows and concrete walls. John narrowly escapes by diving behind steel beams and construction equipment, once again disappearing before the terrorists can surround him. Although Hans fails to capture him, he finally knows exactly who his opponent is. The battle has now become deeply personal, and both men understand that only one of them will leave Nakatomi Plaza alive. After escaping Hans Gruber's trap, John McClane realizes he can no longer trust anyone inside the building. Hans had fooled him by pretending to be a frightened hostage, proving that he was just as dangerous with words as he was with weapons. John feels frustrated that he handed Hans a gun, but he quickly pushes the mistake aside. There is no time to dwell on the past. Every minute that passes brings Hans and his team closer to opening the vault. John reloads his weapon, checks the stolen radio, and quietly moves through the upper levels of the skyscraper. His feet are bruised and bleeding from walking across broken glass and sharp construction debris, but the pain only strengthens his determination. He knows innocent lives depend on him, and giving up is simply not an option. Meanwhile, Hans orders his men to tighten security throughout the building. He now knows exactly who is standing in his way, a New York police officer named John McClane. Instead of treating John like an ordinary hostage, Hans begins respecting him as a worthy opponent. He instructs his team not to underestimate McClane again because one careless mistake has already cost them several men. Although Hans remains calm on the outside, it is becoming clear that John's actions are disrupting the carefully planned robbery. Every delay increases the risk of police intervention, and Hans understands that time is slowly turning against him. Outside the building, the FBI prepares its next move. Believing the terrorists are losing control, the agents order the power supply to Nakatomi Plaza to be shut down. They expect the blackout to weaken the criminals, but Hans secretly smiles when the lights go out. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. The building's advanced vault is protected by several electronic security systems, and the loss of power automatically disables one of the final security locks. Hans proudly tells his team that everything is unfolding according to plan. While the authorities celebrate what they believe is a strategic victory, they have actually helped the criminals move one step closer to the enormous fortune hidden inside the vault. At the same time, John notices strange activity around the lower floors and realizes something important is happening. Using the building's maintenance areas, he secretly makes his way closer to the vault section. From a hidden position, he overhears Hans discussing the bearer bonds locked inside the secure room. John finally understands the truth. The entire hostage crisis has never been about politics or revenge. It has always been about stealing hundreds of millions of dollars. The fake terrorist demands, the carefully controlled hostages, and every delay was simply part of an elaborate distraction. John immediately tries to warn the authorities over the radio, but confusion outside and poor communication make it difficult for anyone to fully understand his message. Back upstairs, the hostages are becoming exhausted and terrified. Hours have passed and hope is beginning to disappear. Holly quietly comforts the frightened employees, encouraging them to remain calm despite the uncertainty. Hans continues watching everyone closely, making sure nobody attempts an escape. Although Holly never reveals that John is her husband, Hans begins noticing her confidence and leadership among the hostages. He suspects she may be more important than she appears, but he still has no proof. This small observation will soon become extremely significant. As the vault doors slowly begin unlocking one security layer after another, Hans believes victory is finally within reach. His men celebrate quietly, convinced they will soon escape with unimaginable wealth. But somewhere above them, John McClane is preparing for another attack. Wounded, exhausted, and completely alone, he refuses to let the robbery succeed. The closer Hans gets to his prize, the more determined John becomes to stop him. With both men now fully aware of each other's abilities, the final stage of their deadly battle is about to begin. The massive vault finally unlocks, and Hans Gruber stands in silence as the enormous steel door slowly swings open. Inside are stacks of valuable bearer bonds worth hundreds of millions of dollars. After months of planning, every risk appears to have paid off. Hans' men begin loading the bonds into large bags, believing their mission is almost complete. They celebrate quietly, convinced that the police have been completely outsmarted. Hans, however, remains cautious. He knows there is still one major problem left: John McClane. As long as John is alive, the operation cannot truly be considered a success. John watches the terrorists from a hidden location and realizes he is running out of time. The robbery has already been completed, and the criminals are preparing for the final stage of their escape. Despite being injured and exhausted, John refuses to quit. His feet are badly cut, his clothes are torn, and he has very little ammunition left. Still, he knows that if the terrorists escape, all the suffering of the hostages will have been for nothing. He decides to attack once again, hoping to create enough chaos to stop their escape plan. At the same time, Hans finally discovers Holly's true identity after finding a family photograph on an office desk. He immediately realizes that Holly is John McClane's wife. Without wasting a second, Hans orders his men to bring Holly to him. For the first time during the hostage crisis, John is no longer fighting only for the innocent people inside the building. His own family has now become Hans' greatest weapon. Holly remains calm and refuses to show fear, but Hans can clearly see that she is deeply connected to the mysterious police officer who has destroyed so much of his plan. Outside the building, the FBI prepares helicopters for what they believe will be the final assault. News reporters continue broadcasting the hostage crisis live across the country, while Sergeant Al Powell remains focused on helping John in any way possible. Unlike the other officers, Powell has complete faith that John is still alive and still fighting. Inside the tower, explosions suddenly shake the upper floors as Hans activates the final stage of his escape plan. Smoke fills the building, alarms begin sounding everywhere, and panic spreads among the remaining hostages. Amid the confusion, John grabs his weapon, takes a deep breath, and heads toward the roof, knowing that the final confrontation with Hans Gruber is now only moments away. John McClane races toward the roof of Nakatomi Plaza as explosions echo throughout the building. Every hallway is filled with smoke, flashing emergency lights, and the sound of alarms. The terrorists are entering the final stage of their carefully planned escape, and John knows there is almost no time left. His body is covered with cuts and bruises, his feet are bleeding badly, and he has fired most of his ammunition. Even so, he refuses to stop. Every painful step reminds him that dozens of innocent lives, including Holly's, depend entirely on him. As he climbs the final staircase toward the rooftop, John notices explosives placed around important sections of the building. It immediately becomes clear that Hans intends to destroy evidence and create enough chaos to cover the escape. John realizes that if these explosives are allowed to detonate while the hostages remain inside, the result will be a catastrophe. He forces himself to keep moving despite his exhaustion, determined to stop the terrorists before it is too late. On the roof, several frightened hostages have been forced outside by the terrorists. They are told that helicopters are coming to rescue them, but Hans has no intention of letting that happen. The roof is actually another part of his escape plan. He expects the FBI helicopters to approach the building, giving him the perfect opportunity to trigger a massive explosion that will distract everyone while his team escapes from a different location. The hostages unknowingly become part of this deadly deception. Some of them desperately wave for help as they hear helicopters approaching in the distance, believing rescue is finally arriving. Hans calmly watches everything unfold, completely confident that his plan is working exactly as intended. His men continue preparing the explosives while keeping their weapons aimed at the terrified civilians. John suddenly bursts onto the rooftop and immediately realizes what is happening. Without wasting a second, he shouts at the hostages to run back inside the building. At first they hesitate, confused by the unexpected warning, but John's desperate voice convinces them to move. He fires several shots toward the terrorists, forcing them to take cover while the hostages rush toward the stairwell. Bullets fly across the rooftop as John exchanges fire with multiple gunmen at once. The situation becomes even more dangerous when the FBI helicopters appear overhead. From the air, the pilots believe they are looking at armed terrorists and begin preparing to engage. John desperately waves his arms and tries to signal them, but the confusion makes communication impossible. Only seconds later, Hans activates the rooftop explosives. A massive explosion erupts across the roof, sending flames high into the night sky. The helicopters are forced to pull away as debris and fire fill the air. From the ground, the authorities believe the terrorists have started destroying the building, while Hans quietly smiles, knowing the explosion has created exactly the distraction he wanted. John barely escapes the blast by diving through a nearby rooftop doorway just before the explosion reaches him. The force throws him violently down a stairwell, leaving him injured but alive. Smoke pours through the corridors as burning debris crashes around him. Despite the blast, John quickly gets back on his feet. He has survived another impossible situation, but he knows Hans is now only moments away from escaping with the bearer bonds. Fighting through pain, John makes his way back into the building, determined to intercept the terrorists before they disappear forever. Meanwhile, Hans begins gathering the remaining members of his team. Although several terrorists have already been eliminated by John during the night, Hans still believes he has enough men to complete the escape. He orders everyone to collect the bags containing the bearer bonds and move toward the lower floors according to the original plan. His confidence has been shaken by John's constant interference, but he still believes victory is within reach. The criminals move quickly through the building, convinced that the police outside are too distracted by the rooftop explosion to notice their real escape route. During the confusion, Hans keeps Holly close to him as insurance against John. He knows that if John appears again, Holly can be used as a bargaining tool. Holly refuses to panic even though she is terrified. She remains calm and avoids giving Hans the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Her courage mirrors John's determination, showing that both husband and wife are willing to risk everything rather than surrender to the terrorists. Hans notices her strength but remains convinced that emotional pressure will eventually force John into making a mistake. Outside, Sergeant Al Powell refuses to leave his position. Unlike many officers who believe the situation is nearly over, Powell senses that John is still inside the building. Throughout the night, he has developed complete trust in the unseen officer communicating over the radio. Powell watches the burning rooftop and silently hopes John has survived. He is ready to help the moment an opportunity appears, even if no one else believes John can still stop the terrorists. Back inside, John quietly follows Hans and the surviving terrorists as they make their final move. He keeps his distance, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His ammunition is running dangerously low, and every bullet must count. The building is filled with smoke, broken glass, and damaged walls after hours of fighting. The once beautiful office tower has become a battlefield, reflecting the chaos that has unfolded throughout the night. John understands that there will be no more chances after this. Either Hans escapes with the fortune, or John ends the nightmare once and for all. As Hans leads Holly toward the upper floors with the stolen bearer bonds close behind, John tightens his grip on his pistol and silently follows from the shadows. The long night is approaching its conclusion, and both men know their next encounter will decide everything. One has spent months planning the perfect crime, while the other has spent the entire night destroying that plan piece by piece. Their final confrontation is now unavoidable, and only one of them will walk away victorious. John McClane quietly follows Hans Gruber and the remaining terrorists through the damaged upper floors of Nakatomi Plaza. The once modern office building has been transformed into a war zone. Broken windows let the cold night air rush inside. Smoke drifts through the hallways, and shattered furniture covers the floors. Every corner reminds John of the brutal battle he has fought throughout the night. His body is exhausted. His feet are covered in blood, and he has only a few bullets left. Even so, he refuses to give up. He knows this is his last opportunity to stop Hans before he escapes with the bearer bonds and disappears forever. Taking a deep breath, John silently moves closer, carefully avoiding broken glass and loose debris that could reveal his position. Hans, meanwhile, believes he has finally regained control of the situation. Most of his plan has succeeded, despite John's constant interference. The vault has been emptied, the rooftop explosion has distracted the authorities, and the surviving members of his team are preparing for the final escape. Still, Hans remains cautious. He has learned that underestimating John McClane is a mistake that has already cost him several loyal men. Holding Holly at gunpoint, he keeps her close as protection, fully expecting John to appear sooner or later. Holly refuses to panic even though she understands how dangerous the situation has become. She remains calm, hoping John will find the right moment to act. John finally reaches the office where Hans is holding Holly. Looking through the broken doorway, he carefully studies the room before making his move. Hans stands near a large window with Holly beside him while the last surviving terrorist watches another entrance. John realizes he cannot rush in recklessly because one wrong move could put Holly's life in danger. Instead, he quietly waits for the perfect opportunity. His breathing slows as he grips his pistol tightly. Every second feels longer than the last. The tension inside the room grows heavier as both men unknowingly prepare for their final confrontation. Without warning, John steps into the room and points his weapon directly at Hans. The two men finally stand face to face after hours of chasing each other through the skyscraper. Hans smiles calmly, pretending he is still in control, while keeping his gun aimed at Holly. John orders him to release the hostages and surrender immediately. Hans refuses, believing John's concern for Holly gives him the advantage. A tense conversation follows as both men carefully measure each other's next move. Neither wants to fire first because both know a single mistake could decide the outcome. Hans suddenly threatens Holly, forcing John into an impossible situation. For a brief moment, it appears Hans has won. John slowly lowers his pistol, making it seem as though he has accepted defeat. Hans confidently steps forward, convinced that John's love for his wife has made him surrender. However, Hans fails to notice one crucial detail. Earlier in the night, John secretly taped a small pistol to his back using packing tape, while appearing to drop his main weapon. He quietly reaches behind his back and grabs the hidden gun. In one swift movement, John raises the concealed pistol and fires two perfectly aimed shots. One bullet strikes the last remaining terrorist before he can react. The second bullet hits Hans Gruber, who stumbles backward in complete shock. For the first time during the entire night, Hans loses his calm expression. The criminal mastermind who believed he had planned the perfect robbery suddenly realizes he has been outsmarted by the very man he underestimated. As he falls against the shattered window, he desperately grabs Holly's wrist in a final attempt to save himself, pulling her dangerously close to the edge of the skyscraper. John immediately rushes forward and grabs Holly with all his strength. For several terrifying seconds, Hans hangs outside the building, holding onto Holly's expensive wristwatch while looking down at the streets far below. The watch, a gift from Holly's company that symbolized her successful career, becomes the only thing preventing Hans from falling. Realizing there is no other choice, John quickly unlocks the watch from Holly's wrist. The moment it comes free, Hans loses his final grip and falls from the top of Nakatomi Plaza. His long fall ends the carefully planned robbery and brings the reign of terror to a dramatic conclusion. John pulls Holly safely back into the room, and the couple embraces after surviving the longest night of their lives. Around them, the sounds of gunfire finally stop, and the building begins to grow quiet. The surviving hostages slowly emerge from their hiding places, realizing the nightmare is finally over. Police officers begin entering the building, securing every floor and helping the injured. John, completely exhausted, lowers his weapon as relief finally replaces the determination that has kept him fighting all night. Although Hans Gruber has been defeated, one final danger still remains before the story can truly come to an end. As Hans Gruber falls from the top of Nakatomi Plaza, silence finally begins to replace the chaos that has consumed the building throughout the night. The remaining hostages slowly realize that the nightmare is over. One by one, they leave their hiding places and look around the damaged offices in disbelief. Broken glass covers the floors, smoke hangs in the air, and the once beautiful skyscraper now looks like a battlefield. After hours of fear and uncertainty, everyone understands that they are alive because one determined police officer refused to surrender. John McClane stands beside Holly, completely exhausted. His clothes are torn, his hands are covered with cuts, and his feet are badly injured from walking barefoot across broken glass all night. Yet, despite everything he has endured, the only thing that matters to him is that Holly is safe. Police officers and emergency medical teams quickly enter the building to secure every floor and rescue the survivors. The hostages are escorted outside, where ambulances and firefighters are waiting. Many employees are still in shock, struggling to believe the terrifying experience has finally ended. Officers begin arresting the few surviving terrorists while investigators search the building for explosives and evidence. The massive robbery has failed, and the stolen bearer bonds are recovered before they can be taken away. News reporters gather outside the building, broadcasting live as rescue teams continue their work. What started as a Christmas party has become one of the most dramatic hostage crises in American history. John slowly walks outside with Holly by his side. Bright emergency lights flash across the streets as paramedics rush over to examine his injuries. Although he is physically exhausted, John politely refuses to make himself the center of attention. He is simply relieved that the hostages survived and that Holly is alive. Their relationship, which seemed close to ending only hours earlier, has been completely transformed by the events of the night. They look at each other with a renewed understanding, realizing how close they came to losing everything. Without saying much, they embrace, knowing that some experiences change people forever. Nearby, Sergeant Al Powell finally meets John McClane in person. Throughout the night, Powell had only known John through the voice on the radio, but a strong bond had developed between them. The two officers shake hands with genuine respect before sharing a warm hug. Powell praises John's incredible courage and determination, while John thanks Powell for believing him when few others did. Their friendship becomes one of the film's most memorable moments, because it is built on trust, loyalty, and mutual respect rather than long acquaintance. Just when everyone believes the danger has ended, one final surprise occurs. Carl, one of Hans' most dangerous followers, suddenly appears despite being badly injured earlier in the night. Driven entirely by revenge for the death of his brother, he raises his weapon and attempts to kill John. Before Carl can fire, Sergeant Powell reacts instantly. Drawing his service pistol, Powell shoots Carl, stopping the attack and saving John's life. The moment is especially meaningful because Powell had previously struggled with the emotional burden of using deadly force. By acting to protect John and the innocent people around him, Powell overcomes his fear and regains his confidence as a police officer. With the final threat eliminated, peace finally returns to Nakatomi Plaza. Rescue workers continue helping the injured, while investigators begin documenting the enormous damage left behind by the terrorists. The media praises the bravery of the officers involved, but John has no interest in fame or recognition. He simply wants to live with Holly and spend Christmas together. Argyle, who had remained in the limousine throughout the entire incident, finally drives up to the entrance. Shocked by everything that has happened, he happily welcomes John and Holly into the limousine. His cheerful personality brings a light-hearted ending after such an intense night. As the couple drives away from the building, the flashing lights of police cars slowly fade into the distance. The long night that began with uncertainty and personal conflict ends with hope, reconciliation, and survival. John McClane proved that true courage does not come from having the best weapons or the perfect plan. It comes from refusing to quit when every obstacle seems impossible. Alone, barefoot, and heavily outnumbered, he defeated an entire group of highly trained criminals through intelligence, determination, and an unwavering desire to protect innocent lives. Hans Gruber's brilliant plan collapsed because he underestimated the strength of one ordinary man who refused to back down. Ending explained. Hans Gruber's robbery fails completely. The bearer bonds are recovered, every surviving hostage is rescued, and John McClane reunites with Holly. Sergeant Al Powell overcomes his own fears by saving John's life, and the film closes on a hopeful Christmas ending that celebrates courage, resilience, and the importance of family. Die Hard ends by proving that heroes are not defined by perfection, They are defined by their willingness to keep fighting when everyone else believes the battle is already lost.